I have thought a lot about whether or not I should encourage my son to become a pastor. I have not made a decision about it, so I guess this is some more of that thinking. The other day, my wife was talking to her friends, and they were talking about something somebody saw on the internet that was talking about how many women are surprised to learn how often their husbands think about Imperial Rome. So my wife and her friends texted their husbands, and my wife asks me out of the blue in a text, "How often do you think about the Roman Empire?" And I say, "Once or twice a day." "Why?" And she explains and asks what I think about when I think about Rome. And I say, all the things, but mostly it's the context for the climax of the book that I spend all my time thinking and writing and talking about. And that, dear reader and listener to my thoughts, is when it struck me that that is in fact how I characterize my job to myself in my head, in my thoughts when I'm not thinking about Rome. Through that text conversation with my wife, I realized 10 years into my career as a pastor that I think of my job as a pastor as spending my time thinking and writing and talking about one book, the Bible. Iddo, the seer, recorded visions concerning the reign of King Solomon, specifically about Jeroboam son of Nebat. His records deal with genealogies that pertain to the events of the reign of King Rehoboam. He also wrote annotations that chronicle the events of the reign of King Abijah. Iddo was a prophet whom we remember not because we've read what he wrote, but because the writer of the book of 2 Chronicles didn't want to re-record what Iddo wrote, so he refers us to Iddo and his writings, to which, to my knowledge, we do not have access. So Iddo's life and career are a mystery to us. We know nothing about him except that he wrote some things, which we know because the Bible tells us. The things he wrote are not in the Bible, and they are not in the Bible specifically because he wrote them. So they didn't get preserved in the way the Bible did, even though the writer who tells us that Iddo wrote some things tells us so because he thinks we'll read them, and tells us so in the Bible, which outlasted them. And the Bible will outlast everything I write about too. And it won't even mention that I wrote them the way it mentions Iddo. And the Bible will outlast whatever my son writes about if he becomes a pastor, and won't mention him either. Which is another thing I think about and haven't decided about. A pastor's legacy. We who write stuff do so in order to leave our thoughts behind, to send our thoughts into the future, to enable other people to write other things. Because as for one guy's biblical thoughts during the end of Trump's presidency and the beginning of Biden's, are they not written in the recordings of Ethan the pastor? I'm not super interested in being remembered. I don't particularly care about leaving a legacy. If I were Iddo, I wouldn't be at all sad that my writings were seen as relevant and useful for a time and then were lost to history as soon as they weren't. I'd actually be pretty happy about that. But I'm writing about a book, about what the book says and about the context of the book, that will outlast me and be relevant and useful until the end of time. And sometimes, for some people, what I write is their only point of contact with that book in any given week. And considering how likely it is that what I write will be lost to history, I'm not sure how I feel about that. So, I want to make sure I write and say that this is what a pastor's writing is for. It's so that everybody, for a time, will have one more point of contact with the book. It's so that there's a slightly increased chance, for whatever time God allows, for people to hear about the book, about what it says and about its context. Pastors write hoping that people will find what they say relevant and useful to the degree that they'll see any clearer for any amount of time how eternally relevant and divinely useful is the oldest, most translated, most stolen, most misunderstood, most accessible, most important, most abused, most true book they'll ever touch. That's why Iddo wrote, even if he didn't know it at the time. That's why the chronicler referred us to Iddo's writings. That's why I write, and if my son becomes a pastor, I hope that's why. To be forgotten, to be lost to history, but not before leaving something behind, not before sending some thoughts into the future, distant or not before taking a chance at pointing people to the best book there is. Pastors write, Christians do, with the hope that somebody, anybody, will know something more, anything at all, about Jesus. You and I are dust and breath, loved by God, bought by Jesus. This podcast is written and produced by me, Ethan Cherney, pastor of Bethel Lutheran Church in Menasha, Wisconsin, member of the Wisconsin Evangelical Lutheran Synod. Outro music arranged and performed by Mr. Peter Shawy, who is like seeing the early fruit on the fig tree. Keep in touch. You can find us on Twitter or Facebook, and also send an email to dustandbreathpod@gmail.com. There's a website with some swag and ways to donate if you're so inclined. But more than that, thank you for listening and sharing with a friend. Reviews on any of the podcasting tools also help promote the show. Now, go do what God called you to do. Be who God made you to be. See what God can do with dust and breath and faith in Jesus, his Son.